Mom stole my $40,000 savings to pay my brother's debts. I stayed silent until my uncle asked about his fund. Her face went pale, I whispered 3 words, and minutes later headlights filled the driveway. You know, I always thought family meant having a safety net. Turns out, for me, it just meant I was the net. Until the day my own mother stole everything I had, then tried to frame me for her own mess. That's when I realized, some lines, once crossed, burn everything down. My name's Lucas, I'm 29, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one. In my family's secret language, that meant I was the guy they leaned on until I finally snapped. I grew up in a house that always smelled faintly of old carpet shampoo and lemon cleaner, a smell that perfectly masked the total lack of accountability. My mom, Elena, has this smile that, if you only met her once, you'd mistake for warmth. It's a thin, precise smile, the kind she'd put on under bright kitchen lights, offering second helpings as if hospitality could ever replace genuine love. And then there's Adrian, my older brother, 32. He lives life like a group project where he contributes the presentation slides 15 minutes before class, except someone else writes those slides and pays for the laptop. My dad? He just kind of existed on the edges. Quieter, gentler than mom, but always out of the room when the real conversations happened. It wasn't that he didn't care. I think he just learned years ago that caring too loudly in our house was like yelling at an ocean wave and expecting it to listen. 5 years ago, I finally broke free. Rented this shabby 1-bedroom place near the river and slowly, painstakingly, worked my way into a stable job at a mid-sized company. The most dangerous thing I handled there were passwords taped under keyboards, honestly. And I learned to save. At first, it was barely anything, an emergency fund that looked like a toddler's piggy bank after a tantrum. But month by month, I became almost obsessive about it. I took on side gigs, scrubbing malware from desperate laptops, resetting Wi-Fi networks, cleaning up after all the digital messes people make when they think pop-ups are their friends. No miracles, just pure discipline. Coffee in hand, fingers on keys, stacking the small wins. It was boring, the way peace often is. And after years of living in a household where emotional weather systems came out of nowhere, boring felt like a godsend. The safe came later. I never trusted banks completely. Not when I grew up seeing money vanish, hearing hushed arguments through hallway doors. I can still picture being 7 and watching an aunt cry over a borrowed envelope at Thanksgiving, my mom's voice steady and accusing, reminding everyone that family means shared resources. That safe, it was a dented steel thing I grabbed from an estate sale for $60. It wasn't pretty, but it did its job. It stopped me from making stupid late-night decisions, and it kept other people from doing the same. I bolted it into the floor of my bedroom closet when I upgraded apartments. Inside, I kept a few important documents, a flash drive with backups, and eventually, the savings that had quietly grown past a number I once thought impossible, $40,000. It's not movie-level, life-changing money, but it's a shield. It's a deep breath. It's knowing that if your car dies, you don't have to become someone else's problem. It's dignity with a barcode. Mom knew I had some money. She'd ask me now and then, all casual, "What are you saving for?" I learned to answer like a politician, just a cushion, I'd say, or maybe a down payment one day. Those words always made her eyes drift, like she was chasing a thought she didn't like. Then she'd pivot straight to Adrian. He was between opportunities, which, in our family, meant the last one imploded and the next one hadn't been invented yet. He was always rebranding his own story, a business idea, a marketing gig, a consultant thing for a friend of a friend. And if you listened closely, you could hear how all those sentences subtly leaned toward me. He just needs a little runway, Lucas. You know how it is. Oh, I knew how it was. The runway always lived under my feet. A month before everything went sideways, Adrian called, asking to meet for lunch. He picked this airy cafe, exposed brick, macrame plants, the kind of place that expects you to photograph your sandwich. He sat there in a crisp shirt he hadn't ironed, collar slightly curled, grinning like we were both in on some private joke. "You look good, man," he said, drumming his fingers on the table. No one drums their fingers when they're about to say something responsible. He started talking about a new project, events, brand partnerships, accelerating growth. The nouns were missing verbs. He promised he wasn't asking for money, just advice. I gave him the kind of advice you give when you know none of it will stick. Write a plan. Run honest numbers. Talk to someone who doesn't love you. He nodded, earnest as a student taking a test he'd already decided not to grade. When the check came, he just stared at me like it was a complex puzzle. I paid. It was cheaper than the fight that would follow. My uncle, Tomas, Mom's brother, he was different. He always liked me, probably because I never asked him for anything. He runs a small property management company and still does his own bookkeeping on software older than me. We talk about backups, two-factor authentication, why you never use the same password for your email and your bank. He's not flashy, but he respects the work of building something brick by brick. Last fall, he called with a question I didn't expect. He had an investment fund, separate from his daily business, money that fluctuated with rental turnovers and deposits, and he was tired of tracking it in clunky spreadsheets. He wanted a better system, something reliable. We spent a couple of Saturdays together setting up a clean structure, a joint ledger separate from his operating accounts, a simple set of controls, a backup routine that ran like a heartbeat. Legally, the accounts stayed entirely in his name. It was basically a bucket of savings and float with clean paperwork and separate reporting. I built the templates, the dashboards, the alerts that would ping him if anything moved strangely. He loved it. He liked me more for being invisible about it. Quiet competence earns trust in ways speeches never do. A few weeks later, he mentioned incorporating a family reserve feature, his words, not mine, a small emergency buffer for loved ones, tightly documented and only with his explicit approval. I set it up exactly as he asked, documenting every permission. I went home feeling like the grown-up version of me was finally real. That was the background hum of my life when Mom asked me to stop by on a Saturday. Just for coffee, she said, her voice bright, that particular brightness it gets when she's already decided something and wants to make it sound light. I drove over mid-afternoon. The house looked the same, a little too polished, a little too full of framed family photos where everyone looked like they knew how to smile on command. The front door was already open. "Hi, honey," Mom said, already turning toward the kitchen. Coffee was ready, 2 cups set out, the good mugs with the blue rim we were never allowed to use as kids. "Adrian's out running errands," she added, like I'd asked. "Your dad's in the garage. Something with the mower." Through the window, I could see him, shoulders hunched, existing in that quiet way he does now, studying a manual as if it held instructions for how to be left alone. We sat. She spooned sugar into her cup, watched it sink slow and dissolve. She didn't ask about my week, or the new deployment schedule at work, or my neighbor's yappy dog. Instead, with practiced casualness, she asked, "Do you still have that safe in your apartment?" I felt the air in my chest do a small, private flutter. I kept my voice steady. "Yeah. Why?" "Oh, just curious," she shrugged. "You know how I worry about burglars. People hear things." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, the way people's eyes do when they're pretending not to look at something they've already seen. Then, without any transition at all, she said, "I've been thinking a lot about family lately. You know how hard it's been for your brother." There it was. The click of a floorboard in an old house. The shift you feel just before everything moves. I nodded. I didn't offer to fill the silence. I'd learned not to pave roads to my own wallet. She reached across and touched my wrist, like we were in some gentle commercial about closeness. "You're such a good son, Lucas. So sensible. Not like me. I'm impulsive, your father says." She laughed, a sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I did something this week. I'm not sure you'll understand. Not right away. But it was the right thing. For this family. For us." I waited. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's car door thunked shut. The living room clock ticked through a second that felt longer than all the others. She smiled, almost bashful. "I found the keys to your safe." My brain did that thing where a thought arrives like a glass falling off a counter, there and broken at the exact same moment. I didn't respond. She filled the space with that soft voice she uses when she's about to step on your neck. "You left them at our place around Christmas. Remember that little brass keyring? I put it on the hook by the garage and forgot all about it. Saw it the other day and thought, how silly of Lucas to leave something so important. I meant to call you." She took a sip of coffee she didn't need and set the cup down with precise care, like a dancer placing a prop. "Anyway, I drove over while you were at work. I know your landlord, you know, lovely man. He let me in when I told him I was your mother, and I needed to check something in your apartment. I brought cookies," she added, as if that somehow mattered. For a second, I couldn't choose which feeling to land on. Anger, obviously. Violation, absolutely. But something else pressed through, this stunned disbelief at how normal her tone was. The sugar still glowed at the bottom of her cup like sand in shallow water. I took your $40,000, she said, as if she were saying she'd borrowed a book. I paid off your brother's debts. It was suffocating him, Lucas. That kind of pressure. You don't know what anxiety can do to a person. He hasn't been sleeping. He's been so stressed. You can see it in his skin. And you? Well, you're stable. You'll make it back in no time. You owe the family that much. She tilted her head, and the smile sharpened. We do for each other. That's what we've always done. Something in me went utterly still, like a lake flattening under a sudden windbreak. I thought about the safe's weight, the feeling of my hands tightening the bolts, the way the metal had warmed over the years as if it were a living thing. I thought about every night I'd said no to dinner out, every weekend I'd taken an extra shift fixing laptops with coffee cup rings on their lids. I thought about how that money represented a promise I made to myself, back when I was tired of needing permission to feel secure. My mouth tasted like pennies. I didn't say anything at first. She took my silence as agreement. She always has. I'm glad you're not making a scene, she cooed. See, this is why I can count on you. You understand what sacrifice looks like. And you'll see how much better Adrian does now that he can breathe. He'll repay it, of course, once he's on his feet. We're all on the same team. On the same team, I let the words hang there. The clock clicked. Somewhere in the garage, Dad's wrench slipped and clattered on concrete. It echoed in the kitchen like another kind of truth. I just nodded. If you say so. The words surprised me, but they fit. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask how she got past the secondary lock on the safe or why she thought any of this was acceptable. I said it the way you acknowledge a forecast you already saw on your phone, predictable, inevitable, and still annoying enough to ruin your plans. If she heard the quiet steel in my voice, she pretended not to. Her smile widened, relieved. Good, she said. Good. I knew you'd be mature about it. She stood, smoothed her sweater, and immediately started talking about dinner. Stay, she said. I'm making lemon chicken. Your brother said he might swing by later. He'll be so grateful when he hears how understanding you were. This is going to be a turning point for him. I stared at the window over the sink, the one that looked out at the backyard where we used to play catch. I watched two sparrows fuss at the edge of the fence like they were arguing about a map. In that moment, the kitchen felt small and bright and airless, like a stage set. I thought about all the ways I could respond. How each path would invite its own set of consequences. Rage would be satisfying and useless. Pleading would be demeaning and useless. Logic would be elegant and useless. My mother collects guilt like some people collect stamps. She knows every shade and where to press it. So I sat there and let the quiet do what it does, make space for a next step that didn't look like a tantrum. That's when the front door opened without a knock. It was Uncle Tomas, briefcase in hand, looking the way he always looks, like a man who knows where every tool is in a garage and can fix anything except the people who live above it. Elena, he called, stepping into the living room before he saw me. Do you have a minute? I was nearby and wanted to ask. He stopped in the doorway when he recognized me. His face brightened. Lucas. Hey, kiddo. Mom's posture shifted. She doesn't like surprise visits. They don't fit on the schedule she keeps in her head. Tomas, she said, her voice slight again. What a pleasant surprise. He held up an envelope, tapping it against his palm. Quick thing, he said. I'm reconciling the float accounts for the rentals and the family reserve bucket you helped me set up. Remember? Just wanted to ask a simple question. Where's the investment fund I trusted you with? Time stretched. The question hung there like a picture frame that hadn't been nailed properly. I watched the change in my mother's face, how the color left it slowly at first, and then all at once, the way a tide recedes. She opened and closed her mouth. Her smile returned weaker, as if it didn't fit anymore. What do you mean? She asked, trying to laugh. I don't have any of your funds, Tomas. What are you talking about? Tomas frowned. The family. Reserve feature. Remember? We talked about limiting access. Last week, I saw movements. Maybe just making sure everything's tidy. It's probably nothing, but you said you wanted transparency. We agreed on it. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and felt the world click into a place that finally made sense. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I just leaned in close enough that my mother could see exactly how calm I was. And I whispered 3 words, quiet as falling snow, clear as glass. Check the logs. I watched him blink, then nod, confusion turning into a thin, focused line across his brow. He slid his phone from his pocket with the unconscious grace of someone pulling a familiar tool from a belt. Opened the app we had set up together. And scrolled. His mouth tightened. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. He pressed a contact and lifted the phone to his ear. "Hi," he said, his voice formal, the way good men's voices get when they need it to be. "It's Tomas. I need a favor. Could you come by the house?" "Yes. Now. Bring the file." Mom stood very still. "Tomas," she said, that brittle laugh sharpening. "Honestly, this is silly. You know me. I wouldn't touch your business." He didn't look at her. He looked at me. The look said everything we didn't want to say in front of her. It said, "Are you okay?" It said, "I'm sorry." It said, "Let me handle this part." 10 minutes later, headlights washed over the living room wall. A car eased into the driveway like it already knew where to park. I could make out the silhouette of a man stepping out tall, carrying a briefcase. My mother's hand found the back of a dining chair and held it like it was the last solid thing in the room. I didn't move. I just watched the light crawl across the ceiling and thought about that safe, about the idea of a safe. About the child I used to be who counted quarters and thought that adults were the ones who knew how to leave things where they belonged. The front door knob turned. The house took a breath. And that was the exact second I understood that the line I'd drawn in my head, the quiet boundary I'd kept for years, had been crossed in a way there wasn't going back from. When the man with the briefcase stepped inside, the air in the living room felt so heavy, I swear you could have cut it with a butter knife. My uncle greeted him quietly, with the clipped, formal tone of someone already past politeness. My mom didn't even glance at the man. She was too busy staring at me. Her gaze was sharp and calculating, as if she could just figure out which words would shut me down, and this whole moment would dissolve. That's when the shift really began. She wasn't just annoyed at being caught. She was angry at me for letting Tomas find out. "Lucas," she hissed through her teeth, her smile glued on for the other men in the room. "You've always had a way of twisting things. You know your uncle is sensitive about his accounts. You're going to give him the wrong impression if you keep playing this little game." There it was. The pivot. It wasn't about what she'd done. It was about me. Somehow, her walking into my apartment, breaking into my safe, and draining $40,000 became a story about how I was manipulative, how I was making her look bad. It was so absurd, I almost laughed, but I didn't. I'd been here before, just never with stakes this high. My uncle looked between us, his face tightening. "Elena," he said slowly, "this isn't about impressions. Money moved that shouldn't have. The logs are clear, but Mom just raised her eyebrows like she was disappointed in him too. Tomas, you've always trusted Lucas too much. He's clever, yes, but he doesn't always see the big picture. He holds grudges. He doesn't understand family sacrifices the way we do." She pressed her hand flat against the table as if to steady herself, and her eyes flicked to me again, sharper this time. "Tell him, Lucas. Tell him you exaggerated." It was surreal, hearing her try to twist the truth right in front of the man who had literally just seen the records with his own eyes. But it was her pattern. When cornered, she didn't apologize. She rewrote the story. She made herself the martyr. The rest of us, the ungrateful ones. And as if on cue, Adrian walked in, jingling his car keys like he was announcing himself to the world. He was all smiles, completely oblivious to the tension. "Hey, family," he said, kicking off his shoes by the door. "Mom, that chicken smells amazing." He gave me a quick nod before his eyes landed on the briefcase, then my uncle, then Mom's tight smile. What's going on?" Mom's face softened instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. She opened her arms. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just family talk. Come here." And he did. He always did, letting her hug him like he was still the little boy who scraped his knees on the driveway. Then she said it right there in front of everyone. She said it. "Your brother's being dramatic again. He doesn't understand why I had to step in and save you. But he'll come around. He always does. He's just stubborn." I felt my chest tighten. Not only had she stolen from me, she was now framing it as heroism and painting me as the unreasonable one. And Adrian. God, Adrian. He just smiled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, man, I didn't ask her to. She just wanted to help. You know how she is." That was it. The shift from victim to villain, handed to me like an unwanted coat I'd have to wear. My uncle's jaw clenched, but he stayed quiet, waiting for more. The man with the briefcase spoke up finally, his voice firm. "For the record, Mrs. Elena, the logs cannot be manipulated from outside the secured system. Every action is timestamped, and we have redundant copies. Your son didn't tamper with anything. But the damage was already done." My uncle's eyes had clouded with doubt. My brother sat quietly, letting the suggestion linger. And my mother, she sat back down, satisfied, sipping her coffee like she hadn't just tried to rewrite the entire narrative of my life in front of the only people who could expose her. That was the moment something broke in me. The trust I'd kept alive, fragile and stubborn, finally snapped. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about Adrian. It was about my mother looking me in the eye and deciding that protecting her favorite child and her own image was worth sacrificing me completely. I sat there, calm on the outside, but inside, I was already rewriting the rules. This wasn't about surviving her manipulation anymore. It was about ending it. The ride home that night was the longest drive of my life. I kept both hands gripped on the steering wheel, watching the streetlights flash across the windshield like they were mocking me. I couldn't hear the radio over the noise in my head. Every word replayed, Mom's smirk when she said she saved Adrian, the way she leaned on Tomas and tried to paint me as the manipulator, Adrian sitting in that armchair, and letting it all happen. My throat was dry, but my palms were slick with sweat. I remember thinking, so this is it. This is what betrayal feels like when it's not just a punchline in a family argument, but a knife slipped between your ribs by the very people who raised you. When I got back to my apartment, I walked straight to the closet. The safe was still there, bolted down, heavier than it looked. I knelt down and turned the handle, even though I already knew what I'd find. Emptiness. The inside smelled faintly of steel and paper. The documents were still there, neat and untouched, but the envelope was gone, along with the years I'd spent building it. I sat on the floor, my back against the closet door, and just let the weight of it press down on me. It wasn't the money alone, it was the meaning of it. Every dollar in that envelope represented something I had denied myself. The nights I said no to drinks with coworkers because I couldn't justify the tab. The weekends I spent hunched over strangers' laptops instead of out with friends. The vacations I never took, the upgrades I never bought. I had built it slowly, carefully, brick by brick, because I needed proof that I could rely on myself when no one else was reliable. And in one sweep, my mother had reached into my life and taken it as if it were just another one of her kitchen cabinets to rearrange. For 2 days, I couldn't eat properly. I went through the motions at work, but every time I looked at my screen, I saw her smile instead. Every time someone asked me a question, I heard her voice accusing me of tampering with Tomas's accounts. Sleep came in short bursts, restless, filled with images of Adrian laughing in that armchair, while Tomas's doubt-filled eyes landed on me. I didn't cry, though. I couldn't. The anger had scorched every tear before it could fall. The worst part was the silence. Mom didn't call. Adrian didn't text. Even Dad, who usually at least checked in with a half-hearted, "How's work?" email, stayed quiet. It was like I'd been cut out of the script. As though I had been cast as the villain in their family play, and the best way to deal with me was to erase me altogether. And for a while, I let myself believe it. I dragged myself through the days with the dull ache of someone who realizes the ground under him was never solid to begin with. But somewhere in that silence, something shifted. On the third night, sitting alone in my kitchen with the hum of the refrigerator as my only company, I realized I wasn't entirely powerless. Yes, she had taken my savings. Yes, she had tried to smear me in front of Tomas. But in her arrogance, she had also revealed something. She thought she still held control, that I would swallow this betrayal the way I had swallowed all the smaller ones. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like swallowing anything. So, I started small. I pulled out my laptop, opened the encrypted backups I'd kept of Tomas's system, and reviewed the logs. Every access was timestamped. Every withdrawal tracked with precision. I wasn't looking for confirmation. I already knew she'd touched it. I was looking for patterns, for proof that could stand on its own legs when words wouldn't. And as I read through the entries, seeing her fingerprints all over them, I felt a strange calm settle in my chest. The plan wasn't fully formed yet. All I knew was that this wasn't going to end with me sitting silently on my apartment floor while she rewrote history. Not this time. Still, the days that followed were hard. I forced myself through work, plastering on a neutral face while inside I was unraveling and rest-stitching myself at the same time. My coworkers noticed I was quieter, but no one asked. I went home each night to the same hollow apartment, cooked the same bland meals, and sat staring at the empty safe as if it might suddenly give me answers. That was my rock bottom. Realizing that the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones who had gutted me, and that the only way forward was to stop expecting them to change. I couldn't fix them. I couldn't beg for fairness from a system built on favoritism and manipulation. The only choice I had left was to turn their own weight against them. And for the first time, sitting there in the glow of my computer screen, I actually started to believe I could. The first signs of change were subtle. A coworker dropped by my desk one Monday morning with a problem no one else had been able to fix. Her tone was apologetic, like she was burdening me. But 15 minutes later, I had her system humming like new. She blinked at me, surprised. "You're wasted here," she said, half joking. "You should be running this place." Her words stuck with me. For years, I had been the quiet fixer, the one who solved problems behind the scenes while others collected the credit. It was comfortable, invisible, safe. But after what had happened with my mother, the idea of invisibility no longer felt like safety. It felt like surrender. So when an internal job posting came up for a senior systems role, I applied. Not because I thought I would get it, but because I needed to do something that proved I wasn't going to keep playing small. 2 weeks later, I was in a glass-walled office, sitting across from a manager who asked sharp questions. Instead of hedging, I answered plainly. I spoke about the systems I'd built for Tomas, the backups, the alerts. I didn't mention my mother. I didn't mention betrayal. I framed it as proof that I could build structures that kept people accountable. The manager nodded, scribbled notes, asked for details, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't just the kid who's good with computers. I was someone with control, someone whose skills had weight. When the offer came through, higher pay, better benefits, more autonomy, I felt something inside me click back into place. The number on the contract didn't erase the empty safe in my apartment, but it reminded me I could rebuild faster this time, smarter this time. With the raise came a shift in my habits. I stopped turning down invitations. I let myself accept a drink after work. I bought a better chair for my apartment instead of another bargain bin one that wobbled. I signed up for a class I'd been putting off. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted it. Each choice was small, but together they stitched a new rhythm into my life. And as my own life brightened, I noticed the cracks widening in the family facade. Adrian called one night, his voice restless. "Hey man, I know things are tense, but I could use a little help, just until I get this new gig going." I listened without interrupting, the way I always used to. But this time, when he finished, I said, "I'm not your safety net anymore." Silence stretched on the line. He tried to laugh it off, but I didn't budge. When I hung up, I realized my hands weren't even shaking. Tomas, meanwhile, began reaching out more often, not with suspicion, but with trust. He invited me to help him modernize more of his systems. What had started as a side favor grew into a consulting arrangement. He insisted on paying me, and the checks, though modest, were steady. "Better me giving this to you than wasting it on some firm that doesn't care," he said. His trust was a lifeline. It reminded me that my mother's attempt to poison that bond had failed. By spring, my apartment no longer felt hollow. The safe was still there, but I stopped staring at its emptiness like it was a wound. Instead, I focused on filling new accounts, clean and separate, ones no one else knew about. My savings ticked upward again, faster now with my new role and consulting work. It wasn't just money, it was momentum, and with momentum came confidence. I stopped lowering my voice when talking about my job around family. I let Tomas brag about my work when relatives gathered. Mom would tighten her smile, but she never corrected him. Adrian would shift uncomfortably, but he didn't challenge it. And Dad, well, Dad still mostly stayed quiet, but one evening after dinner, he pulled me aside and muttered, "I'm proud of you." It wasn't much, but from him, it was seismic. Yet, even in this rise, I knew the story wasn't finished. My mother had taken something from me that couldn't be returned, and she had tried to bury me under her lies. I wasn't naive enough to think she'd stop just because I was rebuilding. No, if anything, her grip would tighten when she realized I was slipping out of it. And that, strangely, gave me clarity. The higher I climbed, the clearer I saw the landscape. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to her moves. I was preparing my own. Momentum has a way of opening doors you never even noticed before. By the time summer rolled around, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was gathering leverage, piece by piece, almost without realizing it at first. My new role at work had me managing not just systems, but compliance checks. That meant I had access to audit tools, reporting frameworks, and the kind of quiet power most people ignore because it hides in spreadsheets. The same instincts that once made me cautious about my own savings now made me sharp in recognizing patterns, trails, and loopholes. It was during one of those late nights at the office, fluorescent lights buzzing, the building nearly empty, that I stumbled on the thought that changed everything. People like my mother never assume the system will hold them accountable. They rely on secrecy, on silence, on the family code of don't air dirty laundry. But I was now sitting on skills and access that could pierce through that shield. I didn't need to yell. I just needed to document. Around that same time, Tomas called me into his office. He had a stack of ledgers on his desk and a weary look in his eyes. I want you to formalize what we've been doing, he said. Not just backups. I want a full compliance trail. If anyone ever questions me, I need to show I've kept everything clean. He leaned back, sighing. You've got the mind for this, Lucas. I trust you more than anyone else in the family. His words landed heavier than he realized. Trust. Real trust, not the lip service kind, was a currency I hadn't held in years. And with it came responsibility. I nodded, already sketching the framework in my head. I can build you something bulletproof, I said. By the end of the month, Tomas's family reserve system wasn't just a side project anymore. It was airtight, multi-layered access, rolling backups, and automated anomaly detection that flagged any odd movement. It logged who, when, and how. Nothing could slip through unnoticed now. And in building it, I realized something. I'd created a mirror of the very thing my mother had violated in me. Only this time, it wasn't a dented steel safe in an apartment closet. This was a fortress she couldn't charm or guilt her way into. Then came the moment of pure accident or maybe fate. While cleaning up some alerts one evening, I traced back a small irregularity that had gone unaddressed from the earlier chaos. It wasn't large, just a fraction of what Mom had stolen from me. But the log was clear. The access came from her, through Tomas's family reserve account. My stomach tightened as I realized I was staring at proof. Proof she had siphoned money not just from me, but from her own brother's system. Proof she couldn't argue away with a smile. And suddenly, I saw the shape of something bigger. It wasn't enough to rebuild myself. It wasn't enough to say no to Adrian's calls. The real power was in letting her hoist herself with her own rope. She believed the family script so fully. Lucas is responsible, Adrian needs protecting, Elena makes the sacrifices that she never considered someone might be writing a different story behind her back. From that point on, I became deliberate. Every conversation with her, I let play out while I kept mental notes. Every time Adrian tried to pull me back into his orbit, I recorded just how deep his dependence ran. And every time Tomas asked me to update his system, I added one more layer of clarity, one more safeguard that pointed all arrows exactly where they needed to point if things ever came to light. Meanwhile, my professional world was expanding. The consulting I did for Tomas turned into referrals, other small business owners who needed reliable systems. At first, I hesitated, not wanting to overextend. But I realized something. The more I grew outside the family, the less I needed their approval. Independence itself was leverage. Money was part of it, yes, but reputation, that was the true fortress. It dawned on me then, revenge wasn't going to be about shouting her down at a dinner table or storming out in anger. It was going to be quiet, methodical, undeniable. She had built her entire identity on being the one in control, the one pulling strings. And now, for the first time, the strings weren't in her hands anymore. I didn't have every detail yet, but I had the position. I had the skills. And most importantly, I had the proof. All that was left was waiting for the right moment, because I knew, sooner or later, she would give me one. She always did. The moment came on a rainy Sunday in late September. I hadn't planned it for that day, at least not consciously. But life has a way of handing you the exact stage you need when the script is already written. Mom had called earlier in the week, her voice syrupy sweet, inviting me to a family dinner, just like old times. I almost declined, but something in her tone told me it wasn't just dinner. It was a performance, and if she wanted an audience, well, I was ready to play my part. When I arrived, the table was set like it was Thanksgiving, linen tablecloth, the good plates, candles flickering even though it was still daylight. Adrian was already there, sprawled in his seat with a glass of wine he hadn't poured himself. Dad sat at the far end, quiet as ever, fiddling with his fork. Tomas was there, too, which immediately told me Mom had orchestrated this as some kind of show of unity. Lucas, Mom sang, her smile wide, arms outstretched like she was welcoming a prodigal son. I'm so glad you made it. Sit. I sat. The food was passed around, conversation light at first. Adrian bragged about a new opportunity, vague as always, while Mom nodded proudly. Then, right on cue, she turned to me. You know, she said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. I've been thinking a lot about how families weather storms. Adrian is finally getting back on track, thanks to all of us pulling together. Her eyes flicked to me, like knives hidden in silk. Even if some of us don't always appreciate the sacrifices others make. There it was. The setup. She was going to spin her theft as family heroism again, in front of Tomas, in front of Dad, with Adrian as her proof of success. I felt the familiar anger rise, but this time I didn't let it show. I just smiled faintly and sipped my water. Tomas, she continued, I'm sure you understand. Sometimes we have to move resources around for the greater good. I've always believed in taking care of each other, even if certain people, her eyes landed on me again, would rather hoard than help. The audacity of it might have floored me once, but not now. Not with what I had. I leaned back in my chair, calm, deliberate. That's an interesting philosophy, Mom. Speaking of taking care of each other, have you checked your logs lately, Tomas? The room stilled. Tomas frowned. Logs. I reached into my bag and placed a slim folder on the table. I'd printed everything, the timestamps, the access records, the transfers. Neat, undeniable. Yes, I said evenly. The ones we set up for your reserve accounts. I brought a copy just in case. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, looking from me to Mom. She laughed too quickly. Oh, Lucas, honestly, always dramatizing. What are you trying to prove? Nothing, I said. I don't need to prove anything. The records speak for themselves. I slid the folder toward Tomas. Every access, every transfer, you'll notice some familiar fingerprints. Tomas opened it, scanning quickly, his face darkening as he read. The room filled with the quiet sound of paper rustling, the weight of silence pressing down harder with each page. Finally, he looked up, his eyes hard on my mother. Elena, he said, his voice low and sharp. You told me Lucas was tampering. But these are your entries, your credentials, your actions. Her smile faltered, then snapped back on like brittle glass. That's ridiculous. He must have. He's clever with computers, Tomas. You know that he could have, but Tomas cut her off. Don't. The system has redundancies. He couldn't fake these if he tried. You lied to me. You lied about him. He pushed the folder back across the table with disgust. Adrian set down his wine glass, his face pale. Mom, is this true? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For once, the performance had no lines left. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat there, steady and calm, the way she never expected me to be. You wanted to talk about sacrifices, I said quietly. Here's the truth. I built my own life from the ground up. I worked for what I had. And when you stole it, you tried to destroy my reputation to cover your tracks. You can spin whatever story you want, but the facts don't bend for you anymore. Tomas shoved back his chair and stood. I can't believe this, he muttered, shaking his head. All these years, Elena, and you'd sink this low. He turned to me. I'll handle this. But you, he paused, his voice softening. You've done more for this family than anyone gives you credit for. Don't let her take that from you again. Mom reached for him, her voice rising, but he pulled his arm away. Dad finally looked up from his fork, his eyes wide with something between shock and shame. Adrian sat frozen, as if the reality had finally crashed through his comfortable haze. And me? I just folded my hands in my lap, steady as stone, and watched the empire of manipulation she had built over decades start to crumble in front of her. That was the revenge. Not shouting her down, not storming out, but letting the truth speak louder than she ever could. The fallout came faster than I expected. Tomas didn't storm out right then. He stayed long enough to make his position clear. This isn't just between you and Lucas, Elena, he said, standing with the folder still in his hand. You tampered with my accounts. That's not family business. That's fraud. I could take this to the authorities tomorrow and you'd have no defense. Mom's face strained of color. She tried to stand, to reach for him again, but he stepped back. Don't, he snapped, sharper than I'd ever heard from him. You've burned enough bridges. Don't think you can charm your way out of this one. Adrian looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. His usual swagger evaporated. Wait, he stammered. So, the debts, the money Mom used. Yes, I said, my voice steady. The car you drive, the rent you didn't pay, the tabs you ran up. She covered it with my savings. And then she dipped into Tomasa's reserve to hide the trail. She didn't just rescue you, Adrian. She made me pay for it twice. He blinked, his mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. Finally, he slumped back into his chair, his eyes fixed on the table. For once, he had nothing to say. Dad, who had been silent all night, finally spoke. His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in years. Elena, he said, shaking his head. I can't believe you'd do this. To him, to Tomas. His hands trembled as he set down his fork. You've dragged this family through enough. I won't defend you this time. The room seemed to shrink as the words sank in. For decades, Dad had played the quiet bystander, the man who looked away to keep the peace. But this time, he wasn't looking away. He was looking right at her. Tomas tucked the folder under his arm. I'll be in touch, he said coldly. We'll settle this properly. And if you try to spin this against Lucas again, I won't hesitate to make every page of this file public. He glanced at me, gave a short nod, and walked out into the rain. Mom crumpled into her chair, her perfect composure cracking. I did it for the family, she whispered, as if repeating it might make it true. But no one answered. I stood slowly, my chair scraping back. I looked at Adrian, still pale and silent. At Dad, who sat rigid but unflinching. At Mom, who couldn't meet my eyes anymore. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. You taught me one thing, Mom, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the silence. Family doesn't mean sacrifice. It means trust. And the day you broke that, you stopped being my safe. I turned and walked out into the night, the rain cool against my skin. Behind me, the house that had always felt like a stage was finally collapsing in on itself. For the first time, I wasn't the quiet, responsible one holding everything together. I was the one who walked away. And I didn't look back. So, I've told you my story. I need to know, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? How do you deal with family when they become this toxic? Drop a comment below, I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts.